Hello and welcome. I'm Rosanna Lockwood. You are watching W News. Broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya News headquarters, these are our top stories. At least 9 people have been killed in tornadoes after Hurricane Milton makes landfall in Florida. An Israeli airstrike kills at least 28 people and wounds dozens of others, sheltering at a school in Deir el-Balah in central Gaza. Israel's Air Force killed 5 paramedics after striking a civil defense emergency center in the southern village of Deir el-Balah. And Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu considers retaliation following last week's attack by Iran. Welcome. Well, we do start in the US, where Hurricane Milton continues to wreak havoc across Florida. At least 4 people, or the count has now been updated to 9. At least 9 people have been killed in tornadoes that hit the East Coast. Hurricane-force winds continue to batter communities that are just starting to recover from Hurricane Helene, which only hit 2 weeks ago. Some areas are experiencing rainfall levels that occur only once in 1,000 years. Governor Ron DeSantis saying more flooding is expected in coming days. While Milton is moving into the Atlantic, it is expected to continue to bring hurricane-force winds and heavy rain. Here is Florida Governor Ron DeSantis updating the media earlier.
We had over 80,000 people that were into shelters overnight as the storm hit the state. We will better understand the extent of the damage as the day progresses. And you have people that are out there assessing damage right now. First responders have been working all through the night to help people who were in distress. And what we can say is the storm was significant, but thankfully this was not the worst case scenario.
Well, the mayor of Tampa, where the hurricane made landfall, warned residents to stay indoors while rescue crews were assessing the damage.
Please, please stay inside. Stay inside until we can get out there with our teams. They are all in action right now. Don't go through standing water, and make sure if you see any trees or wires down, call and report those, and we will get them fixed as quickly as we can.
Well, for more on this, I'm joined from St. Petersburg, Florida, by the Weather Network presenter and former co-host of The Storm Chasers, Mark Robinson. Mark, you spoke to my colleague Tom on this show yesterday from the start of the winds. Tell us what it was like.
Yeah, it was one of the, it was very, it's almost hard to describe because it started off very slow, not too much going on. We moved down to Sarasota as the winds began to ramp up. We got to Sarasota, and the winds, we got hit by the outer bands, got quiet, and then we started to get hit by the inner bands. And then as darkness fell, it began to just die off completely as the eye began to pass over us. In fact, the storm made landfall almost directly over top of us. And that point, everything got very ominous, quiet, and then the backside, the rear part of the eye wall hit us. That was much more powerful than the other side. So the winds were ramped up to 150 kilometers an hour, maybe even more than that. We just watched as the power outages, power flashes were happening across Sarasota, and of course debris flying, surge coming in. It just all happened very, very quickly on the backside of the storm, which isn't always the strongest, but in this case, it happened to be the strongest part of the storm.
Dramatic stuff, Mark. Although looking at the situation now, I see blue skies behind you. So is it all calm?
Yeah, I mean, this is St. Petersburg. This was one of the areas that we feared was going to be hit by the storm surge. And it could have been 15 feet of storm surge into Tampa Bay and, of course, into St. Petersburg area. Instead, what happened was the eye went a little bit south, so it drove that surge into areas like Punta Gorda, Port Charlotte, and where we were in Sarasota. But here, and I want to show you sort of behind me, you can actually see the stadium with the missing roof. That's Tropicana Field, where the roof was removed because of the wind. So this area really took the brunt of the winds and the rain. So tremendous amount of flooding throughout the city, throughout Tampa. And what we've been seeing as we've sort of been taking a look, is very widespread damage, but not, the huge damage that could have happened. But there are a few significant spots here and there, and the stadium behind me is one of those significant spots.
Look, how did the storm end up comparing to expectations? Because climate skeptics out there today saying that it was all overblown.
Well, you know what? The whole thing is, yes, it was not as bad as we were expecting, but that is a very, very good thing because the potential for catastrophic damage was there. And that would have been 15 feet of storm surge into Tampa Bay, into Tampa. I'm very happy that didn't hit the way it did. But the hurricane itself absolutely was as strong as we expected. It just didn't push the surge into the place that could have turned this from a major disaster to a gargantuan disaster.
In terms of what's happening now, are there further concerns about more storms this season?
That is the billion-dollar question. It's one that I've been answering. And being a meteorologist, I've been looking at the long-range models. And one of the things that we've seen this year is that we've had a back-ending of the hurricane season. When we were supposed to have the most hurricanes, we had none. Now that we're getting sort of into the back, the latter part of the season, we're now getting all of our hurricanes. So it is entirely possible that it will happen. And, my home country, Canada, we often see storms at this time of the year. And so we're now watching for hurricanes on our East Coast. So they're not as strong as the ones down here, but they can definitely do damage. And that's something that we're paying attention to.
No, really good to get the roundup from you again. Weather Network presenter and former co-host of the Storm Chasers, Mark Robinson.
Thank you.
Let's get some more on this now with our correspondent Nick Harper standing by in Washington, D.C. Nick, good to see you. And as we know, Washington, D.C. very far from Florida. But let's talk to you about the political reaction to this. President Biden's reportedly been speaking of Florida Governor DeSantis just in the last sort of hour or so. How did that go?
That's right, yeah, the two of them getting on a phone call first thing this morning, as well as President Biden getting updates during the course of the day. Also reportedly huddling in the Situation Room at the White House to get the latest update from officials, including the Disaster Recovery Agency here in the US, FEMA. I think part of this is really all about President Biden trying to show himself in a position of strength after a couple of weeks of attacks from the Republicans, suggesting that the federal government simply hasn't done enough to help all of those affected by Hurricane Helene that hit just under 2 weeks ago. So trying to get out in front of this, showing that he's working with the Republicans, Republican Governor Ron DeSantis, and showing that the federal government is doing as much as possible, not just to help those people affected across multiple states by Hurricane Helene, but those who are now having to deal with the damage of Hurricane Milton in Florida. Because remember, by extension, his Vice President, Kamala Harris, who's running for the presidency, will get judged on how all of these recovery response efforts from the government go over the next few weeks until we run up until November the 5th, Election Day.
Indeed, they will be held to task for that. So what is the scale of the rescue efforts off the back of Milton so far? Do we have a sense of how much funding there is, what authorities are being involved?
Well, at this stage, Biden is saying quite simply he is there for the people of Florida and the federal government intends to do everything that they possibly can. We know that they pre-positioned a number of National Guard down there. The Pentagon also sending reserve troops in the region of about 1,500 to the state ahead of the storm hitting. But part of the issue now is the potential for mounting costs. There are already estimates that in terms of insurance losses, this could run into around $100 billion that insurance companies would need to pay up. Now, the problem with Florida is that many insurance companies quite simply don't want to touch the state. It's very difficult for businesses, for homeowners there to get insurance, and they often rely on local insurance companies who perhaps then don't pay up for the losses that are incurred as a result of these hurricanes. But the federal government has sent many people down there. It says that it will continue to send people down there and continue to help with those rebuilding efforts. But quite simply, for the homeowners who've had roofs ripped off homes, that will be down to them to have to cover, even though the government is there standing by, ready to provide shelter in the short term and food and water if they need it.
Now, as you pointed out, is the final days of the Biden administration. So what is happening in the election race? While all eyes are on that storm, there must be plenty going on with Harris and Trump.
Well, there is. They had to cancel a couple of their events over the course of the last few days, but they are still campaigning. And interestingly, overnight we had a new poll come out, the Reuters Ipsos poll, important because it showed really what the situation is when it comes to middle America. It zoomed in on suburban voters. It showed that Kamala Harris has now pulled ahead of Donald Trump. She is now leading him 47% to 41% amongst suburban voters. And then the snapshot on middle-income household shows that she's also leading Trump at 45 to 43%. This is important because suburbanites make up about half of the US electorate, and it is an important voting bloc that Joe Biden won over in 2020. He beat out Trump by about 6% amongst suburbanites, but had lost support considerably during his time in office. Before he dropped out, he was trailing Donald Trump by a long margin. Now, of course, we have Kamala Harris in the race, and she's been able to turn that deficit around, now leading him by a much larger margin. But of course, it always just comes down to those swing states. There's 7 of them this time around, and this Reuters Ipsos poll quite simply showed that it is still too close to call in the majority of those states. Really not much room between the two of them, between Trump and between Harris.
And Nick, speaking of voters, North Carolina lawmakers passing legislation today that is supposedly going to make it easier for those residents affected by Hurricane Helene to vote. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that's right, Rosanna. This is something that was passed unanimously in North Carolina. It's really about trying to help the people there who've been affected by Hurricane Helene, to give them more flexibility when it comes to voting. So they've outlined a number of measures, really trying to help those people who perhaps are no longer living in the residence where their voting card is tied to. So if they're in a temporary accommodation, if they're staying with friends and family, if they're even staying outside of the state of North Carolina, they will still have the opportunity to vote. And they're trying to extend the ability for people to send in mail-in ballots, and as well as that, they're changing rules around early voting, voting at voting sites, and also trying to recruit additional poll workers. The question, of course, is, with all of these new rules being put in so close to the election, if there are any problems with the results, if Donald Trump, say, doesn't win the state of North Carolina, is he going to cry foul? Will he suggest that there have been voting irregularities, things being put in place to prevent Republicans from voting? Of course, the idea behind this is that it makes it easier for all voters, Democrats and Republicans, to cast their ballot. But it does perhaps create some problems further down the line if there are some results that perhaps one candidate or the other doesn't like the look of.
Our correspondent Nick Harper in Washington, D.C. Thank you. To some news from around the world now. Russia now dismissing reports North Korea sent military personnel to fight in its war in Ukraine. The Kremlin spokesperson calling it fake news. This after South Korea said there was a, quote, high possibility North Korea could deploy troops to support Russia in its over 2-year-long war. French President Emmanuel Macron will hold talks with Ukraine's President Zelensky in Paris later today. The visit comes as part of the Ukrainian leader's 48-hour trip to Europe. Air defense is at the top of his agenda as the president hopes to increase support for his country's fight against Russia. Zelensky will visit London, Paris, Rome and Berlin, shoring up Western support ahead of the consequential US elections next month. Meantime, China saying it will work with Pakistan to protect its citizens working in the country. This after 2 Chinese engineers died in a separatist group attack on Sunday. China has previously asked Pakistan to increase its security measures. To Lebanon now, where officials say 5 paramedics have been killed after an airstrike hit a civil defence emergency centre in the southern village of Dirghaya. Overnight, airstrikes killed at least 5 people in central Lebanon's Mount Lebanon governorate. In Beirut's southern suburbs, 2 additional strikes were also reported. The Israeli military says it has killed 2 Hezbollah commanders, Ahmed Mustafa al-Hajj Ali and Mohammed Ali Hamdan, during an operation in southern Lebanon. Additionally, Israel claimed to have bombed weapons warehouses in Beirut and military infrastructure in southern Lebanon. Now this comes as the Israeli military says approximately 40 rockets were fired from Lebanon towards northern Israel's Upper Galilee. I'm joined now by Senior Fellow at the Middle East Institute, Firas Maksad. Good of you to make time for us. And let's talk for a moment about the UN peacekeepers, UNFIL, because Israeli attacks on several UNFIL bases in the Blue Zone in southern Lebanon today have apparently left 2 UN peacekeepers wounded. Will that news make any impact?
Yes, I think so. It's been a long-standing Israeli demand that UNIFIL get out of the way. Given the topography of South Lebanon, the Israeli ability to commence ground incursions is very limited by that topography. And so having a large UNIFIL footprint is a nuisance for the Israelis. And I think we just heard the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations ask that UNIFIL now be completely pushed out of that border area, some 5 kilometers, so that the IDF can operate more freely. So I do think that those kind of attacks are premeditated and are an attempt by the Israeli military to push UNIFIL out of that area, as very explicitly stated now by their ambassador at the United Nations.
So an actual active part of their strategy, potentially, is what you're saying. Let's also talk about some other sort of urges we've had or calls, because Benjamin Netanyahu on Wednesday speaking to Joe Biden, that was yesterday in this call, but he asked Biden that the need to minimize harm to civilians, in particular in the densely populated areas of Beirut. I'm sure those words would be welcome in Lebanon, but will it make a difference?
Well, we don't know yet is the honest answer. There's clearly an American green light for this operation. It wasn't the case earlier, but the American position is not static. It's been dynamic. It's been changing. And I think when the administration saw these Israeli successes in serving significant blows to Hezbollah's leadership time and again, culminating with the assassination of Nasrallah, they have decided to allow Israel more leeway to degrade Hezbollah, degrade Iran's influence in Lebanon. Now, that said, the administration has also tried to put some parameters for the Israeli military in Lebanon. So no to attacking Lebanese state authority and the Lebanese army. No to attacking the Beirut International Airport to allow the continuation of evacuation efforts from there. So there are some parameters that the administration is trying to place on Israel, but we all know that the status of the relationship between the Israeli prime minister and the American president is a fraught one, and one where right now the Israelis feel that they can have some leeway given the upcoming U.S. elections.
Yeah, fraught is the word that comes to mind from a lot of the interviews I've had this week about that US-Israel relationship. Is it the case now then that Netanyahu is acting completely without care, if you like, for any of the allies' wishes, or particularly from Israel, from the US?
I think it's safe to say that Netanyahu is very much in the driver's seat. Certainly the US has leverage. It is Israel's most important ally, the #1 source of its military supplies and armament. Israel simply cannot continue fighting without the United States. But that said, there's clearly an absence of political will to exercise that leverage here. At least we haven't seen it yet. And in a tightly contested presidential election where Israel is a domestic issue, domestic consideration for both parties, I think Benjamin Netanyahu, who understands American politics better than most, also understands that he's got a free hand now. From now, possibly until November 5th, depending on what the results are, but also possibly until January 20th, until a new administration is sworn in.
And look, another really interesting report from the last 24 hours or so is that the Biden administration have been trying at least to push for new elections in Lebanon, if they can, to elect a new president. To viewers who aren't aware, there's a sort of caretaker government, if you like. The government hasn't been able to be formed properly in the last couple of months. What do you make of that? Do you think that will have any influence at all? Do you think it's even possible right now in Lebanon for there to be a government formed?
The election of a president in Lebanon has been a long-standing American, Arab, and Lebanese demand. It is constitutionally mandated, and the post has been vacant now for 2 years. Now, that said, the White House has been much more focused on what they consider to be strategic priorities in Lebanon rather than the election of the president. And so that means the White House has been focused on a new security arrangement for South Lebanon in relation to Israel, the implementation of a ceasefire, and then demarcation of that land border. The State Department, however, has been much more interested in trying to find a pathway towards the election of that president. And I don't think that reality has changed. The American position wants to see an election of the president, but in terms of strategic priorities at the White House, they're much more focused on a ceasefire and a new security arrangement right now.
And just reminding ourselves what Israel claims its objectives to be in Lebanon, why it's there and what it's doing. It says it's there to try and, get the residents of northern Israel back to their homes. That was the initial stated objective. But the other one is to remove Hezbollah from the region. I appreciate this isn't a short answer, but do you think that is going to be possible?
Well, thank you for that question. I wrote an article about 2 weeks ago for Time magazine, very much underscoring that the stated objective of the operation, which is to return some 60,000 Israelis to their homes in the north, isn't really the overriding objective. Just as was the case in Gaza, the hostages, the return of the Israeli hostages is an objective. It's not the objective. The objective here for Benjamin Netanyahu is to readdress the balance of power in the region vis-a-vis Iran, whether it is the Iranian proxies in Gaza, Hamas, or it is the crown jewel in Lebanon, Hezbollah, or even the various militias and logistical support bases in Syria and Iraq. And now we're talking about a direct Iranian-Israeli confrontation. So this is much broader than the stated objective of returning some 60,000 Israelis to the north. This is about reshaping the region in Israel's favor. Clearly, the Israeli prime minister now senses the opportunity, given the situation in the White House and the absence here in Washington, D.C.
And just finally, look, Israel's Defense Minister Yoav Gallant warning its next strike on Iran, and we are expecting some sort of anticipated retaliation. They're saying it will be, quote, deadly, precise and surprising. What did you read from that?
I would expect them to say that, but honestly, my reading is that this might be a multi-layered, multi-stage response. Clearly, there's a very strong American aversion to any Israeli strike that would target Iranian nuclear facilities or even the oil infrastructure, for the impact that that would have, not only on U.S. forces in the region, potentially in an Iranian response, but also on the global economy, given the price of oil. This is also to underscore, and one should note, that Israel does not have the military capability to significantly degrade or take on Iran's nuclear infrastructure without U.S. assistance. So I really do think that the perhaps Israeli play here is a multi-stage operation. Perhaps the first stage will focus on military sites, the IRGC, the deeply unpopular Basij that are responsible for the repression within Iran, to see what kind of impact that will have. That will then generate an Iranian response for sure, which can then also allow for a stage 2 Israeli operation. And then all bets are off.
Senior Fellow at the Middle East Institute, Firas Maksad, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
To some business news now. Pharmaceutical giant GlaxoSmithKline saying it will pay up to $2.2 billion to settle thousands of US lawsuits claiming its discontinued heartburn drug Zantac caused cancer. The company reaching agreements with 10 law firms representing around 80,000 claimants. Elon Musk's expected to unveil a prototype of Tesla's long-awaited robo-taxi, the Cybercab, in the next few hours. The project's faced delays and criticism over the past few months, with some analysts believing it distracts from Tesla's focus on developing more affordable electric vehicles. And Indian business tycoon Ratan Tata has passed away aged 86. The trailblazing Indian figure is best known for making large acquisitions, including buying the British tea firm Tetley in 2000 and the Anglo-Dutch steelmaker Corus in 2007. Let's also take a look at some sports news now, shall we? Spanish tennis legend Rafael Nadal retiring from the sport, aged 38. The Davis Cup in November will be his last professional play. He holds 22 Grand Slam singles titles. British cyclist Mark Cavendish's final professional race will be the two-day Tour de France Criterium in Singapore next month. Organisers have announced the event will mark the end of his remarkable career, spanning an impressive 165 race wins. In golf, Rory McIlroy and Scottie Scheffler will compete in an exhibition match against Bryson DeChambeau and Brooks Koepka in Las Vegas in December. This 18-hole challenge will feature two top-ranked PGA Tour players facing off against two stars from the LIV Golf Series. Returning to the Middle East and to Gaza now, where at least 28 Palestinians have been killed in airstrikes while sheltering in a school. The Israeli military claims Hamas fighters were operating within the compound of the school when it was hit. Well, this all comes as an initial release from an investigation from the United Nations claims Israel is seeking to destroy Gaza. For more on all this, I'm joined now from Cairo by Dr. Ahmed Moghrabi, who was a surgeon at the Nasser Hospital in Khan Younis in Gaza until April this year. Thank you very much for joining us. And I want to focus with you, if you don't mind, Dr. Ahmed, on the healthcare system in Gaza. The UN inquiry today saying that Israel is deliberately destroying Gaza's healthcare system, and this could amount to a war crime. Did this reflect what you saw?
Exactly, exactly. You know, myself, I used to be a head of plastic and burn department at Nasser Hospital. I worked there till the invasion of the IDF to the hospital. I mean, to the Nasser Hospital, mid of February. So the health system actually is being destructed systematically. You know, if you remember, that was started in Al Shifa Hospital on October. Then the IDF, I don't know, actually, they are targeting all hospitals. Al Shifa Hospital, Nasser Hospital, many medical medical points in Gaza already have been targeted. If you look even at schools, at universities, at mosques, churches, actually there are no red lines. They are targeting everything in Gaza, not only hospitals.
The UN's inquiry also accusing Israeli forces of deliberately killing and torturing medical personnel. Does that also reflect what you saw?
Exactly. The ex head of department at Nasser Hospital, actually before I came, the head of the department, Dr. Hassan Hamdan, actually they targeted, they killed him with the entire family. Actually now he used to be like 63 years old, you know, and they targeted him and they killed him. He's a plastic surgeon, and everybody knows about the murder at the IDF prison, Dr. Adnan El-Borsh and many of our colleagues, that we don't know the fate of our medical colleagues. I remember when the IDF invaded the Nasser Hospital, they arrested the whole medical team there. Everybody they arrested. Because, you know, the medical personnel at Nasser Hospital used to be like 20% of the medical personnel who remained at Nasser Hospital. 80% actually evacuated before the siege of the hospital. They arrested and detained the 20% of the medical personnel actually who remained at Nasser Hospital. Until now, many of them, they are inside the IDF prison. Till now, we are speaking now, and they are inside the prison, or we don't know the fate of our medical colleagues.
Why do you think the Israeli forces are targeting hospitals per the UN's inquiry?
Exactly. Actually, this question, every time when I was in Gaza, I used to ask everybody. I used to be a consultant for MSF organization, if you know this organization, MSF France. I used to be a consultant. there, and I asked them the same question: why they are targeting surgeons, mainly surgeons? What is the problem between us and the IDF? Actually, I don't have the exact question. I don't have, really, there is no exact answer for why they are targeting doctors. Maybe they think that we are, maybe somebody of us already treated some of hostages at the hospital. But although actually we are saving lives, we are as surgeons or as a doctors, we are saving lives. So why they are arresting us, why they are killing us, nobody knows. Really, I don't have an answer for this question.
Do you have?
Why they are targeting the medical?
Do you have any confidence that should it be alleged that there has been a war crime or a crime against humanity happening, as the UN inquiry has suggested, that there will be charges brought against the Israeli military? Do you think that will happen?
I think yes. What is going on, on the ground, it is a real genocide. It is a genocide. Invading hospitals, it is a genocide. If you invade the hospital without killing anybody or execution anybody, it is a genocide. So what do you think? Targeting and destroying hospitals, even international organizations. Everybody saw the central kitchen, what happened with them. Everybody heard about targeting the NGOs' buildings, like MSF shelter. They targeted the MSF shelter. Actually, there is no red lines. They are targeting everything, everybody. So I think this is a real genocide, what is going on.
It's very good of you to make time to speak to us and share your experience of Gaza. Dr. Ahmed Moghrabi, who was a surgeon at the Nasser Hospital in Khan Younis in Gaza. Let's get a reminder now of our top stories. At least 9 people have been killed in tornadoes after Hurricane Milton made landfall in Florida. Israeli airstrikes kill at least 28 people and wound dozens of others, sheltering at a school in Deir al-Balah in central Gaza. And in Lebanon, 5 paramedics have been killed after airstrikes hit a civil defense emergency center in the southern village of Dir Yahya. Meanwhile, Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu is tonight considering retaliation to last week's attack by Iran. That is all we have time for. Coming up next is Hadley Gamble's interview with NE CEO Claudia Descalzi. And at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, join Tom Burgess-Watson for Global News Today. Goodbye.